Justice League had one of the most troubled productions of any superhero film in recent memory. It seems to have been bedeviled by all sorts of scandal, gossip and personal tragedy. The original theatrical release went through many changes and cuts and performed underwhelmingly at the box office. The hopes or the idea of a director's cut from original director Zack Snyder seemed very unlikely until, of course, the pandemic hit and Warner Brothers decided to invest in this director's cut, and it was eventually released in 2021. To celebrate this launch, McFarlane Toys capitalised by releasing a line of action figures in the 7-inch scale to support the movie. This line, although pretty short-lived, was quite a full roster of characters, which is nice to see, and I think it would go some way to giving fans and collectors a line of toys for a film and a franchise that perhaps wasn't best served at the time of release. And what's particularly pleasing about this line from McFarlane Toys is that they also produced a couple of the major villains of the film, and not just the Justice League heroes themselves. And of course, the central villain of the film is none other than Steppenwolf. Now, the first thing to comment on this figure is that he is one of McFarlane Toys' MegaFigs, i.e. a giant figure. He's in the 7-inch scale, but he is significantly taller than the other figures in this line. He's probably closer to 8 or 9 inches tall. That does mean, of course, that he is in oversized packaging. This is the standard branding that we've seen from the DC Multiverse line from McFarlane Toys. It has obviously the black borders, which I've always taken issue with being a little bit too bland for such a colourful world and universe. But nevertheless, it is the standard packaging, but as you can see, it's much bigger. I would say it's probably 1.5 size wider and 1.5 size taller than your usual DC Multiverse packaging. I'd say that it has the same depth or width of packaging as we'd seen from the other figures in this line. It's not hugely wider on the side panel, and of course we can see that standard branding that we've seen on all of the other figures in this line. Again, it's just a black bar really with the name of the character and the movie that it's from. The only difference here is that we can see the JL or the Justice League logo of Zack Snyder's cut. There's nothing particularly wrong with this approach, but I'm not a huge fan of it. I always think a big side panel like this is a fantastic opportunity to have some lovely artwork so you can put it on display on your shelf when you stack these figures next to each other. It's a real shame they don't make more of this space. The reverse of the packaging has a little bit more colour and personality though, which I quite like. Again, the background is just a matte black background, not an awful lot of text, which is nice, and a nice big image here of Steppenwolf, which is great. It's also replicated inside the packaging as a trading card as well, and at the bottom of the packaging there, we can see the other characters that are available in action figure form in this line. The interior inlay is the standard one we've seen across many of these DC Multiverse packagings now. There's nothing distinctly Justice League about it. In fact, a lot of the images here are from Batman comics from across the years. We can see, obviously, packaged in this tray though, we have that trading card of Steppenwolf, and we have a small stand for him to stand on as well and help him balance. So the first thing you're going to notice with this figure, of course, is his size. He is quite a tall figure, and he's quite broad too, which is pretty cool. And as a result, he does strike a fairly imposing presence in the toy collection, which is quite nice to see. But he's also quite gangly, and there is a tendency for this figure to want to fall over. He's not the best position to be able to stand freely. You probably are going to want to make use of that little base that he comes with, because he only has a very small surface area when it comes to his feet. In terms of the sculpting, I have to say, I think that McFarlane Toys have done an excellent job here. Obviously, this is distinctly Zack Snyder's version of this character. Steppenwolf had a complete revamp when it came to how he looks on screen to the theatrical version of this character, which is pretty cool. And I think McFarlane have done a nice job of replicating what we see on screen. There's a lot of textures, a lot of different parts to this character, a lot of spiky parts to stick out. And I think they've done a nice job when it comes to the paint apps as well, to just really give this character a little bit more depth and nuance to this sculpt as well, which is cool. There's a bit of black paint going on, a little bit of a black wash running through this silver paint, which looks pretty good. Not quite as shiny and metallic as we see in the film, but nevertheless a pretty good sculpt and nice paint apps overall. One thing that was really cool about this figure and kind of revelationary to me is the hand sculpts, because of course he has so many multiple fingers and those elongated nails. I got to be honest, I never noticed this in either cut of the film, so maybe my powers of observation are failing me a little bit, but it was really cool to see this in the figure, and I think they've done a really good job of actually rendering this in plastic form and in a very functional and practical way that is quite tricky to pull off. So I think this is quite cool, and it makes him look very unusual and kind of alien, which is fantastic. And of course we can see this detailing in the costume all the way throughout the figure, right the way down the legs. Of course he even has those hind bits coming out of his thighs there, which look really cool and spiky and a bit creepy looking, which is great. And as I've already noted, he does have these very small feet though, and I think that's one of the failings of this figure, is that it's such a small surface area to carry such a big bulky figure, particularly in terms of the upper body as well. So this does have a tendency to cause the figure to want to lean or fall over. In terms of articulation, he has a ball joint in the head, which will allow his head to turn all the way around, and there's a little bit of wiggle room to allow him to sort of nod up and down a little bit and sort of lean side to side. It's a little bit hindered by the big huge neck and of course the sides headpiece that he's wearing there, but there's still a good range of motion here. He does have these big fantastic ball joints in his shoulders, so of course he can really kick his arms up and out. This is supported by an upper bicep swivel, a single pin swivel at the elbow so he can bend his lower arm left and right, and of course it does hinge to 90 degrees. And then he has a single hinge in the wrist, and I do take issue with this. First of all, it's not a ball joint, so he can't really spin his hand from side to side. It can only hinge forwards and backwards, and if you look carefully, as you see here, it cuts right into the palm of the hand, so it does look pretty ugly when you hinge it one way or the other. It's not a very attractive looking joint. He does have a ball joint in his mid-torso, which is good. He can spin from side to side very easily. There's a little bit of wiggle room to allow him to sort of lean from side to side and bend forwards and backwards, but not a huge amount in truth. It's pretty redundant, but it is good for letting him turn from side to side. He's got ball joints in the hips, of course. The legs kick out to the side, they kick forwards, and they kick back a little bit as well. He's of course got a single joint at the knee, so that bends to 90 degrees, but it is not a pin swivel, so it cannot move from side to side. And then he has a swivel, a pivot at the ankle, so he can hinge his foot forwards and backwards, and it does move from side to side, although it's a little bit of a struggle on mine, to be honest. And then you will notice he also has toe articulation as well, so he's got two front toes and he can bend these both forwards and backwards on that hinge there, although be warned, mine was a little bit stiff, and as you can see, it's a little bit of a struggle to get this to lie flat once it's been lifted up. He comes with one accessory, which is of course his giant battle axe. I think this looks really cool. Again, very nicely sculpted, nicely painted, and a nice wash running through it to really capitalise on that sculpt. So this looks very threatening, and he has no problems holding it whatsoever. It's a nice, solid, tight grip there, and it looks pretty good. So for a size comparison, here he is standing next to Batman, the Arkham Asylum Batman from this DC Multiverse toy line from McFarlane Toys. So he's roughly the same size as the Ben Affleck Batman from Justice League, to give you a sense of how they would scale together. This is pretty good. In all honesty though, I do think that in terms of the actual scaling as it appears in the film, to my mind and my eyes, I think that Steppenwolf should be a good deal taller than this though. This looks a little bit too small, but it still gives a good indication. It's still a nice attempt to show obviously a huge size difference between these characters, and it still looks pretty good. But for me personally, I think this figure scales much nicer with a 6-inch version of the Justice League characters. This looks just more appropriate to me. So this is the Mayfix Wonder Woman, and I think this just looks a lot better. It looks a lot more like we see in the film, in my opinion. Likewise, here he is with the DC Films, DC Collectibles Superman figure, and again, I think this scale looks really good. This looks pretty appropriate, and I really like the way this looks, so this is a nice, healthy scale here. And for those who are curious to see how he scales against other MegaFigs from McFarlane Toys, here he is standing next to the recent Violator figure from the Spawn line, which I think is really cool. I really love that Violator figure. I think he's such a beast. He's such a huge, heavy figure, and you can see that obviously the Violator is still quite tall, much bigger than the Steppenwolf. Steppenwolf is a couple inches shorter, especially if the Violator extends his legs all the way up, but this gives you an indication of how he scales in comparison to those other big figures. So final thoughts from me then, I'm going to give this 3 stars. That might seem a little bit underwhelming. I do like this figure, I think it is well made. I think it's really cool that we actually have a Zack Snyder Steppenwolf. I think it's, in my opinion, a much superior look to the theatrical version of this character, so very cool to have this in the collection and have him represented, which is lovely. And I think he scales quite nicely with other Justice League figures in a 6-inch scale, perhaps not so much with the McFarlane DC Universe multiverse line of toys, where it's just they're a little bit too tall in my opinion. I do really like the sculpting. I think it's really cool. It comes with his battle axe, and I think the paint apps are very nicely done. For me, though, there's just something a little lackluster about this figure that I can't quite put my finger on. I'm a little bit frustrated with the way that he tends to have a tendency to fall over, that he struggles to balance on his feet sometimes, and a couple of the joints, particularly in the legs, were a little bit loose for me when I opened him up. But overall, he's a nice enough figure, but there's nothing particularly amazing about him, considering, obviously, he's at a much higher price point given that he is a mega figure. So overall, a decent figure, a nice entry to the collection, but he's not earth-shattering, it's pretty standard stuff. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.